Sarah Hudson sat in her corner office, staring blankly at the skyline of Chicago. The city buzzed with its usual energy, but for her, it was a muted hum, overshadowed by the weight in her chest. The modern, angular design of her workspace reflected her career, sharp, efficient and uncompromising, but now even the sleek lines of her success felt hollow. She picked up a magazine from her desk, flipping through it until she found the article. Her own photograph stared back at her, accompanying the scathing critique of her latest project, a state-of-the-art conference center that had been touted as revolutionary. Instead, it had become a costly embarrassment, plagued by structural issues that many blamed on her ambitious but impractical design choices. Sarah's name, once synonymous with excellence, was now whispered in meetings and scrutinized in editorials. Sarah, her assistant, a young woman with wide eyes and a nervous energy, peeked into the office. "The team is ready for you in the conference room." "I'll be there in a minute," Sarah replied, her tone even but cold. The door clicked shut, and she leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. The article slid off her lap, landing on the floor. She didn't bother picking it up. Her evenings weren't much better. In her high-rise apartment, the silence was oppressive. The muted tones of her decor, grey, beige, white, mirrored her mood. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen island, scrolling through her emails. Her sister Claire had sent her another message, a string of words filled with casual warmth and an invitation to visit. Sarah ignored it, as she had the last two. Her relationship with Claire had always been strained. Claire's life was so different from hers, simple, rooted, filled with the warmth of a close-knit family. Sarah often envied that warmth but didn't know how to approach it. The Hudson sisters had lost their parents young, and while Claire had sought comfort in building her family, Sarah had thrown herself into her career. A notification pinged on her phone, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from a former colleague. "Heard you're being considered for the Bridgewater project. Call me if you want to know more." Sarah frowned. She hadn't heard of Bridgewater, nor had she applied for any new projects. Curious, she made a mental note to investigate. The following morning, the routine was the same: a rushed cup of coffee, the sound of heels clicking against the polished floor of her office building, and a stack of papers waiting for her review. But her mind kept drifting. The Bridgewater project. What was it? Why was her name being mentioned? That evening, Sarah found herself doing something she rarely did, letting her curiosity win. She searched for Bridgewater, North Carolina, and found images of a quaint town nestled by a river, its centerpiece a crumbling stone bridge. She clicked through photos, feeling an unexpected pang of something she couldn't quite name. Nostalgia, maybe, or longing. The bridge was old, its arches weathered and graceful, a stark contrast to the cold, sharp lines of her own designs. It reminded her of her early days as a student, sketching endlessly in notebooks, driven by a love of art and architecture that felt pure and untainted. As the night deepened, Sarah stared out of her window at the sprawling city lights. Bridgewater seemed a world away from Chicago, both in distance and pace. For years, she had told herself she was living the dream: recognition, awards, and a place at the top of her field. But now, she wasn't so sure. The cracks in her confidence felt as wide and irreversible as the ones in the old bridge she had just seen. She closed her laptop and climbed into bed, though sleep eluded her. Her mind was filled with the image of the bridge, standing resolute yet fragile, a testament to endurance. For the first time in a long while, Sarah wondered if there was something she needed to rebuild, not in her career, but within herself. The following morning began with the usual rhythm. Sarah's alarm blared at 6:30 sharp, followed by a quick shower and a meticulously prepared cup of coffee. She skimmed her emails while half listening to the hum of a morning news program. Most of the messages were routine, meeting agendas, project updates, and the occasional polite inquiry about her availability for future work. But one email caught her attention. Subject: Bridgewater project proposal from Derek Caldwell, Caldwell & Co. Engineering. Sarah opened it. Her curiosity piqued. Derek Caldwell was a name she recognized, an influential figure in civil engineering with an impeccable reputation. The email was brief but to the point. Sarah, I'd like to discuss an opportunity that could benefit from your unique vision. It involves designing a new bridge for a small town in North Carolina. I believe this project could be a perfect match for your expertise. Let me know if you're interested. Best, Derek. The email felt like a lifeline. Her reputation in Chicago had taken a hit, and the idea of stepping away from the intense scrutiny appealed to her. But a small-town project? It seemed beneath her stature, or at least the stature she had worked so hard to cultivate. She hesitated, letting her finger hover over the reply button. The phone rang, jolting her out of her thoughts. It was Derek himself. She answered, keeping her voice cool and professional. Sarah Hudson speaking. Sarah, good to hear your voice, Derek said warmly. I hope you saw my email. I wanted to reach out personally because I think this project is something special. Special how? Sarah leaned back in her chair, skeptical. Bridgewater is a small town with a lot of heart but not much funding. They've secured enough to rebuild their bridge, a key connection between the two halves of the community. It's a functional need, sure, but the town sees it as more than that. They want something iconic, something that reflects their history and spirit. Sarah frowned. And you thought of me because you're brilliant at blending functionality and artistry, Derek replied smoothly. I know you've had some setbacks recently, but this could be an opportunity to remind everyone, and yourself, of what you're capable of. There it was, the acknowledgement of her recent failure, couched in compliments. Sarah bristled, but didn't immediately shut him down. Derek, sensing her hesitation, pressed on, Look, I won't sugarcoat it. It's not a flashy project, and the budget is tight, but it's the kind of challenge I think you'd excel at. Plus, the town council is eager to work with someone who can bring a fresh perspective. I'll think about it, she said, trying to sound non-committal. Fair enough. Take your time, but don't take too long. They're looking to make decisions quickly. After hanging up, Sarah sat in silence, the details swirling in her mind. A small town with a crumbling bridge, a modest budget, a chance to start fresh. She pulled up images of Bridgewater again, this time with a keener eye. The bridge, though damaged and outdated, had a certain charm, an authenticity that was missing from the cold, metallic structures she had grown accustomed to designing. Later that day, Sarah met her sister Claire for lunch, a rare occurrence. Claire, ever the optimist, chatted about her kids and the upcoming renovations on their house. Sarah half listened, her thoughts still on Bridgewater. You're distracted, Claire said, breaking into her reverie. What's going on? Sarah hesitated before explaining the proposal. Claire's face lit up. That sounds perfect for you. A new project, a change of scenery. What's holding you back? It's not exactly a career-defining opportunity, Sarah said, picking at her salad. It's a small-town bridge, not some groundbreaking architectural marvel. Claire tilted her head, her expression softening. Maybe that's what you need right now, something grounded, something with meaning. You've been chasing the big projects for so long, maybe it's time to focus on something smaller, but no less important. Sarah rolled her eyes, but couldn't entirely dismiss the truth in her sister's words. Still, the idea of uprooting herself to work in a remote town felt daunting. She had spent years building her life in Chicago, even if that life felt increasingly hollow. That evening, She replayed Derek's words in her mind, a chance to remind everyone and yourself of what you're capable of. As much as she hated to admit it, the idea resonated. She closed her laptop and stood by the window, gazing at the city lights. Somewhere far away, in a town she'd never been to, there was a crumbling bridge waiting to be reborn. The question was whether she was ready to take the first step. Sarah spent the next 2 days oscillating between intrigue and apprehension about the Bridgewater project. The proposal lingered at the back of her mind, weaving its way into her thoughts during meetings, workouts, and even her restless nights. She had drafted, but not yet sent, a polite email declining Derek's offer. Something held her back. The familiar rhythm of her life in Chicago offered comfort, even if it felt empty. Her daily routine of polished presentations, sleek design sketches, and carefully curated professional relationships provided structure. Yet, beneath the surface, a gnawing sense of dissatisfaction grew. On the third evening, Claire called. Sarah hesitated before answering, already bracing for her sister's inevitable questions about the project. "Hey," Claire began, her voice warm and direct. "Have you made a decision yet?" "I'm still thinking about it," Sarah replied, keeping her tone neutral. "You've been thinking for days. What's the holdup?" Sarah sighed, pacing her living room. "It's just a lot to consider. Leaving Chicago, working on a small-town project, it feels like taking a step back." "Maybe it's not about stepping back," Claire countered. "Maybe it's about stepping out of the box you've put yourself in." Sarah bristled. "I haven't put myself in any box. I've worked hard to build my career. This just doesn't feel like the right move. Or maybe it's the right move, and you're scared to admit it." Claire's voice softened. "Look, I get it. Change is terrifying. But sometimes the things we're most afraid of are the ones that lead us to where we're meant to be." Sarah murmured a vague acknowledgement, eager to end the call. Claire's words struck a nerve she wasn't ready to face. The next morning, a series of small mishaps seemed to conspire against her. Her alarm failed to go off, leaving her scrambling to get ready for an early meeting. On her way to the office, her taxi got stuck in traffic, and she arrived flustered and late. The team, already gathered, greeted her with tense silence. The presentation she had meticulously prepared was met with lukewarm reception, her ideas critiqued with a sharpness she hadn't expected. By lunch, Sarah was exhausted, her confidence shaken. She retreated to a quiet corner of the office cafeteria, trying to make sense of the morning's events. It wasn't just the critiques, it was the nagging feeling that her work had lost its spark. She had spent so much of her career chasing perfection, but now she couldn't help wondering, for what? That evening, her assistant, Melissa, stopped by her office. "Heading out for the day," Melissa said hesitantly. "Anything else you need?" Sarah shook her head but paused as Melissa lingered. "Something on your mind?" Melissa hesitated before speaking. "I just wanted to say, I think you're incredibly talented. Whatever happened with the last project doesn't define you." Sarah offered a small, strained smile. "Thank you, Melissa. That means a lot." As Melissa left, Sarah sat in her empty office, her assistant's words echoing in her mind. The truth was, she didn't feel talented or confident anymore. The Bridgewater project, with its modest scale and community-focused vision, felt both beneath her and like a lifeline she didn't want to admit needing. Late that night, unable to sleep, Sarah wandered through her apartment. She found herself standing before her bookshelf, her fingers brushing over old architecture textbooks and design journals. Pulling out a sketchbook from her college days, she flipped through its pages. There, amidst the rough sketches and ambitious concepts, she found a drawing of a small, arched bridge. She had designed it for a class project, imagining it as a gateway connecting two villages. Looking at the sketch, Sarah felt a pang of something she hadn't felt in years, pure, unadulterated inspiration. She had poured her heart into that design, not for recognition or awards, but simply because it had felt meaningful. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider that maybe Bridgewater wasn't about stepping back or forward. Maybe it was about reconnecting with the part of herself she had buried beneath years of ambition and success. Yet doubt lingered. The stakes felt high, and the risk of failure loomed large. As she stared at the sketch, her phone buzzed on the counter. It was a follow-up email from Derek. "Sarah, I understand this might be a big decision. Let me know if you'd like to discuss further. The town council is eager to move forward." She didn't respond. Not yet. The soft chime of Sarah's phone woke her earlier than usual the next morning. She reached for it groggily, her heart sinking as she read the email from Derek Caldwell. It was brief and direct. "Sarah, the council is moving quickly on their decision. If you're not interested, please let me know soon so we can move forward with other candidates. Hope to hear from you. Derek." Her immediate reaction was irritation. The tone was polite, but it carried an implicit urgency that made her stomach tighten. She had spent days mulling over the project, and now the clock was running out. The weight of indecision pressed on her chest as she got ready for the day. By mid-morning, Sarah's nerves were on edge. A critical review meeting for another project had dragged longer than anticipated, filled with sharp critiques and tense exchanges. One of her senior colleagues had questioned her proposed designs in front of the team, an occurrence she wasn't used to enduring. By the time she returned to her office, she felt raw and defensive. The Bridgewater project loomed in her mind. It wasn't just Derek's email, it was everything. The growing dissatisfaction with her work, the relentless pace of her career, and the sense that no matter how hard she pushed, something fundamental was missing. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at her door. "Come in," she said, straightening in her chair. To her surprise, Claire walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Figured I'd find you here," Claire said, setting the coffees down on Sarah's desk. "You weren't answering my calls." Sarah groaned. "You drove all the way here just to pester me." Claire ignored the jab and sat down across from her. "I came because I'm worried about you. You're stuck, Sarah, and I think you know it." Sarah sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I'm fine, Claire. Just busy." "Busy is your favorite excuse," Claire said softly. "You've built this amazing career, but you shut everything else out. I get it. You've had to work hard to get where you are. But is this where you want to be?" The question hung in the air, its weight undeniable. Sarah didn't answer immediately, her eyes fixed on the steam rising from the coffee Claire had brought. "It's not that simple," she said finally. "I can't just pack up and leave. What if I fail again? What if this project turns into another disaster? And what if it doesn't?" Claire countered. "What if it's exactly what you need to find yourself again?" The words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they felt true. Sarah turned her chair to face the window, looking out at the city skyline. She had once loved this view, but now it felt like a barrier, a constant reminder of the high stakes and unyielding expectations she had imposed on herself. "I don't know," Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can handle it." Claire stood and walked around the desk, resting a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You're stronger than you think, and you don't have to have it all figured out right now. Just take the first step." After Claire left, Sarah spent the rest of the day trying to focus on her current projects, but her thoughts kept drifting to Bridgewater. By evening, she was back in her apartment, nursing a glass of wine and staring at her laptop. Derek's email sat in her inbox, unanswered. She began researching the town again, this time diving deeper into its history. She found articles and photographs detailing the community's attachment to the old stone bridge. One piece featured an interview with Mark Everett, a local historian and vocal advocate for preserving the structure. His words were passionate and pointed. "This bridge isn't just a piece of infrastructure, it's a symbol of our town's resilience and identity. To destroy it would be to erase a part of who we are." Sarah frowned, feeling a twinge of unease. She hadn't considered the possibility of resistance from the town itself. What if her involvement in the project made her the enemy of the very people she was meant to serve? Her phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Just take the leap, sis. You've got this." Sarah set her glass down and closed her laptop. The pressure was mounting from all sides, her career, her family, and even within herself. But the clarity she craved still eluded her. The morning sun streamed through Sarah's apartment windows as she sat at her kitchen counter, staring at her laptop. The cursor blinked on the draft of her reply to Derek Caldwell. The email was simple, a single line confirming her interest in the project and requesting more details. Yet, sending it felt like stepping into uncharted territory. Her finger hovered over the send button as a familiar wave of doubt washed over her. What if taking this project was a mistake? What if she failed again? The memories of her last disastrous project surfaced, a series of headlines dissecting her choices and tarnishing her reputation. She had worked tirelessly to climb to the top, only to feel like she was clinging to the edge of a crumbling cliff. Her phone buzzed, pulling her attention away. It was another text from Claire. "Any decision yet? You've been silent," which usually means you're overthinking again. Just breathe and trust yourself. Sarah chuckled despite herself. Claire knew her too well. She took a deep breath, held it for a moment, and pressed send. The email vanished into the ether, leaving her simultaneously relieved and anxious. There was no turning back now. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and deadlines, but Sarah found herself uncharacteristically distracted. Every time her phone vibrated or her email notifications chimed, her heart leaped, only to sink when it wasn't Derek's reply. Finally, just before 5 p.m., an email popped into her inbox. Subject: "Welcome to the Bridgewater project from Derek Caldwell." She opened it with a mix of excitement and trepidation. "Sarah, I'm thrilled you've decided to join us on this journey. Attached are the initial project details, including timelines, budgets, and key contacts in the town. I'll arrange for you to visit Bridgewater next week to meet the council and get a feel for the site. Let's set up a call tomorrow to discuss next steps." "Bestes Derek." Sarah skimmed the attachment, her eyes catching on the words tight budget and community engagement. It was nothing like the high-profile projects she was used to. No glossy marketing campaigns or cutting-edge technology. Yet, there was something refreshing about its simplicity, a chance to build something meaningful without the noise of corporate agendas. That evening, Sarah called Claire. "I said yes," she announced without preamble. "Of course you did," Claire replied, her voice bright with pride. "You're not as stubborn as you pretend to be." Sarah laughed. "Don't get too comfortable. I'm still skeptical about this whole thing." "And that's fine," Claire said. "Just give it a chance. You might surprise yourself." The days leading up to her trip to Bridgewater passed quickly. Sarah pored over the project details, familiarizing herself with the town's demographics, the bridge's current state, and the council's expectations. The more she read, the more complex the situation seemed. The old bridge was beloved by many, and the idea of replacing it had already sparked controversy. Sarah braced herself for resistance, knowing she would need to navigate the community's emotions as carefully as the engineering challenges. When the day of her departure arrived, Sarah found herself oddly nervous. She packed light, just a few essentials and her laptop, and headed to the airport. The flight was short, but filled with anticipation. As the plane descended into the regional airport, she caught her first glimpse of the Carolina landscape: rolling hills, dense forests, and a river winding its way through the countryside. It was a stark contrast to Chicago's steel and concrete, and for a moment, Sarah felt a flicker of calm. A car was waiting to take her to Bridgewater, and as they drove through the town, she took in its charm. Small businesses lined the streets, their signs hand-painted and welcoming. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and distant rain, and people waved to one another as they passed. It felt worlds away from the fast-paced anonymity of the city. The car stopped near the river, where the bridge came into view. It was both beautiful and worn, its stone arches weathered by decades of use. Sarah stepped out and approached it, feeling a strange pull. The structure had a quiet dignity, standing resolute against time and change. She could see why the town was so protective of it. As she stood there, the weight of her decision began to settle. This wasn't just about her career. It was about proving to herself that she could create something lasting and meaningful. For the first time in months, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but perhaps it would be worth it. Sarah stood by the riverbank, her gaze fixed on the old stone bridge. The arches, though weathered, exuded a quiet elegance. Moss crept along the edges, and faint cracks hinted at the years it had endured. It was beautiful in its imperfection, and Sarah felt a twinge of respect for its resilience. "Ms. Hudson, I presume?" A deep voice broke her reverie. She turned to see a man approaching, his figure silhouetted against the late afternoon sun. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair and a rugged demeanor. His clothes were simple, dark jeans and a button-down shirt, but he carried himself with an air of confidence that immediately struck her. "Yes," she replied, stepping forward to meet him. "You must be Mark Everett." "I am," he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm, his expression steady. "Welcome to Bridgewater. I hear you've been tasked with designing our new bridge." Sarah detected a slight edge in his tone, though his words were polite enough. "That's the idea," she replied, keeping her voice neutral. "I've heard you're quite the advocate for this one." Mark crossed his arms, glancing at the bridge before looking back at her. "It's not just a bridge, it's a piece of history, a part of this town's identity. Replacing it isn't as simple as drawing up plans and pouring concrete." His words stung, though Sarah didn't let it show. She'd expected some resistance, but the intensity of his conviction caught her off guard. "I understand its significance," she said carefully. "But the structure is deteriorating, and the town needs a safe, reliable way to connect both sides of the river. My goal is to create something that serves the community while honoring its heritage." Mark raised an eyebrow, his skepticism evident. "Honoring its heritage. That's a nice line, but I've heard it before. Words don't save history, actions do." Before Sarah could respond, another voice called out from behind them. "Mark!" "Don't scare her off before she's even started." A woman approached, her smile warm and disarming. She was in her 50s, with a cheerful demeanor and a welcoming presence. "I'm Ellen," she said, offering her hand to Sarah. "I run the cafe down the street. Mark's bark is worse than his bite, I promise." Sarah shook her hand, grateful for the interruption. "Nice to meet you, Ellen. And don't worry, I've dealt with my share of tough critics." Ellen laughed. "I like you already. Let me know if you need a coffee or a friendly face while you're here." Mark didn't join in the levity. Instead, he gestured toward the bridge. "If you really want to honor its heritage, you should take a closer look. Feel the stone, walk its length. This bridge isn't just about engineering, it's about people." Sarah met his gaze, recognizing the challenge. "I intend to..." Mark nodded curtly, then turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing with Ellen. "Don't mind him," Ellen said gently. "He's passionate about the bridge, but he's a good man. He's just protective." "I can see that," Sarah replied, watching as Mark disappeared down the path. "I guess I'll have to prove I'm not here to destroy what he values." Ellen smiled knowingly. "You'll figure it out. We're not so bad once you get to know us." Later that evening, Sarah checked into the small bed and breakfast where she'd be staying during her visit. The room was cozy, with floral wallpaper and a quilted bedspread that felt worlds away from her minimalist apartment in Chicago. After unpacking, she opened her laptop and began reviewing the town's records on the bridge. The documents detailed its history, from its construction in the early 1900s to its role in connecting the two halves of the town during a devastating flood in the 1950s. There were even photographs of townsfolk repairing it by hand after a storm, their pride evident in their smiles. Sarah couldn't help but feel a growing sense of responsibility. This wasn't just another project, it was a symbol of resilience, a lifeline for the people of Bridgewater. But it was also clear that replacing it would be an uphill battle, especially with Mark Everett as her unofficial opponent. The next day, she returned to the bridge with a notebook and camera, determined to study it up close. As she traced her fingers along the rough stone, she began sketching ideas for a design that might preserve elements of the original while meeting modern safety standards. The challenge was daunting, but for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt a spark of inspiration. Just as she was packing up her things, she heard footsteps on the bridge. Turning, she saw Mark approaching, his expression unreadable. "Doing your homework?" he asked, his tone more curious than confrontational. Sarah nodded. "If I'm going to do this right, I need to understand what it means to you and to this town." Mark regarded her for a moment before speaking. "Good, because if you're here to just tear it down and start over, you'll be fighting more than just me." It wasn't exactly an olive branch, but it was a start. And for now, that was enough. The early morning mist clung to the streets of Bridgewater as Sarah ventured out from her bed and breakfast. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, a stark contrast to the metallic tang of city air she was used to. Clutching a steaming cup of coffee from Ellen's cafe, she took a slow walk along the main street, observing the life around her. Storefronts were modest but well-loved, their windows decorated with handwritten signs announcing local events. Residents greeted each other with familiarity, their exchanges warm and unhurried. This world felt foreign to Sarah, its slower rhythm, its sense of rootedness. Yet, there was a quiet appeal in its simplicity. She could feel it tugging at something deep within her, something she had ignored for years. Her phone buzzed, breaking the spell. It was a reminder of the call scheduled with Derek later that morning. Returning to her room, she opened her laptop and pulled up the project details again. The timelines were tight and the expectations high, but she had navigated worse. What unsettled her wasn't the technical challenges, it was the emotional weight of the project. Bridgewater's attachment to the old bridge was more profound than she had anticipated, and Mark Everett's stern advocacy was only the tip of the iceberg. As the clock struck 10, Derek's face appeared on her screen, his easy smile radiating confidence. "Good morning, Sarah. How's Bridgewater treating you?" "It's different," Sarah said honestly. "The town has a lot of charm and a lot of opinions about this project." Derek chuckled. "You've met Mark Everett then?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You could have warned me." "He's passionate, no doubt," Derek replied, "but he's not your enemy. He's a historian who cares deeply about preserving the town's legacy. If you can win him over, you'll win over most of the community." Sarah nodded, absorbing his advice. "The design challenge here is unique. Balancing safety functionality, and the historical value. It's going to take more than just technical expertise. That's why we chose you, Derek said, his tone firm. We need someone who can think beyond the blueprints. This project isn't just about a bridge, it's about trust. The town needs to believe we're not here to steamroll their history, and you need to believe you can pull this off. Sarah hesitated. And if I can't? You can, Derek said confidently. You've had setbacks, sure, but those don't define you. Use this project to remind yourself of what you're capable of. After the call, Sarah closed her laptop and sat back, staring at the ceiling. Derek's words resonated, but they also unnerved her. She wasn't just designing a bridge, she was rebuilding her own sense of purpose. Later that day, Ellen invited her to a community picnic by the river. At first, Sarah was reluctant. She wasn't in the mood for small talk or polite curiosity about her work, but Ellen was persistent, and Sarah found herself walking toward the park, carrying a plate of freshly baked cookies Ellen had insisted on bringing. The picnic was lively, with families sprawled on checkered blankets and children running barefoot through the grass. Sarah felt out of place, but Ellen stayed by her side, introducing her to various locals. Mark was there too, standing by a table laden with food, deep in conversation with an older couple. His presence made Sarah's pulse quicken, not with fear, but with the awareness that she hadn't yet earned his approval. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found herself speaking with Tom, a young engineer assisting on the project. He was earnest and eager, full of ideas about how to modernize the bridge while preserving its aesthetics. "I've lived here my whole life," Tom said, his voice tinged with pride. "That bridge isn't just a landmark, it's a memory for a lot of us. I learned to fish with my dad under those arches." Sarah smiled, warmed by his story. "That's what makes this so challenging. I want to honor what the bridge means to everyone, but I also need to make sure it's safe and sustainable." "You can do both," Tom said, his confidence in her unwavering. "And if anyone gives you trouble," he gestured toward Mark, who was now watching them from across the park, "just remember, deep down, he wants what's best for this town too." As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Sarah found herself lingering by the riverbank, watching the water ripple beneath the old bridge. She thought about her life in Chicago, the relentless pace, the endless pursuit of recognition. For the first time, she questioned whether returning to that life was what she truly wanted. Ellen approached, her voice soft. "You're thinking hard about something." Sarah nodded, not taking her eyes off the bridge. "I've spent so much of my life chasing after the next big thing. Maybe it's time I start building something that lasts." Ellen smiled. "Sounds like you're on the right path." Sarah didn't reply, but in her heart, she felt the faint stirrings of something she hadn't known she was missing, a connection not just to the project, but to the people and place it served. The morning air was brisk as Sarah stood at the edge of the bridge, her notebook in hand. She'd come early, hoping to avoid interruptions, but Bridgewater was already stirring. She could hear the faint hum of a truck in the distance and the chatter of two fishermen preparing their gear by the riverbank. Sarah stepped onto the bridge, her heels clicking softly against the stone. She ran her fingers along the weathered railing, imagining the hands that had done the same over the decades, children leaning over to watch the water, couples strolling arm in arm, workers crossing with tools in hand. The bridge wasn't just a structure. It was a thread in the fabric of the town's history, but its age showed. Cracks splintered across the stone, and patches of moss clung to the damp crevices. While it still stood strong, it was clear that time had taken its toll. Sarah pulled out her camera, capturing angles that highlighted both its beauty and its vulnerabilities. Her goal was to understand every inch of it before she began sketching her designs. As she adjusted the focus on her camera, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw Mark Everett approaching, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. "Early start," he commented, his tone neutral. "I thought I'd get a head start before the day gets away from me," Sarah replied. She wasn't sure if his presence was intentional or coincidental, but she braced herself for another tense conversation. Mark leaned on the railing, looking out at the river. "She's a beauty, isn't she? The bridge, I mean." "She is," Sarah admitted. "And she's held up remarkably well for her age. But the cracks are telling. If nothing's done, it'll only get worse." "I know," Mark said, his voice soft. "But tearing her down entirely, it feels like losing a piece of ourselves." Sarah hesitated, sensing an opening. "That's not my intention," she said carefully. "I'm not here to erase what's important to Bridgewater. I want to find a way to preserve its essence while making it safe for the future." Mark turned to her, his expression skeptical but less guarded than before. "Words are easy, Ms. Hudson. It's action that matters." "And I intend to show you through action," she said firmly. "But I need your insight. You know this bridge better than anyone. Help me understand it, and the town, so I can do this right." Mark studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." It wasn't much, but it felt like progress. As Mark walked away, Sarah felt a mix of relief and determination. Winning him over wouldn't happen overnight, but she was willing to put in the effort. Later that day, Sarah met with the town council in a modest community center. The meeting room was functional, with folding chairs and a long table lined with stacks of papers. The council members greeted her politely, but the tension in the room was palpable. They were cautious, their smiles thin and their words measured. Derek Caldwell had joined via video call, his presence a steadying force as Sarah presented her initial findings and ideas. She emphasized her commitment to honoring the town's history while ensuring the new bridge would meet modern standards. One of the council members, an older man named Roy, raised a hand. "Ms. Hudson, I've lived in Bridgewater my whole life. My grandfather helped build that bridge. Can you promise us that whatever you design will respect its legacy?" "I can promise you that it will," Sarah replied. "But I also need your input. This isn't just my project, it's yours. I want to collaborate with you to ensure the design reflects what the bridge means to this community." Her words seemed to resonate, and the room relaxed slightly. As the meeting wrapped up, Roy approached her with a firm handshake. "You've got a tough road ahead, but I appreciate your approach. This town doesn't take well to outsiders, but you're doing it the right way." Sarah smiled, grateful for the small vote of confidence. "Thank you, Roy. That means a lot." As she left the community center, the weight of the day settled on her shoulders. She had taken the first steps into this new world, but it was clear that the challenges ahead would test not only her skills, but also her ability to connect with the people of Bridgewater. That evening, she returned to the bridge, sketchbook in hand. The sunset cast a golden glow over the stone arches, and the river shimmered like liquid fire. For a moment, the world felt still, and Sarah allowed herself to imagine what the finished project might look like, a bridge that wasn't just functional, but also a tribute to the past. In that moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. She was beginning to understand that this project wasn't just about rebuilding a bridge. It was about rebuilding herself. Sarah stepped into Ellen's cafe the next morning, the scent of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries wrapping around her like a comforting blanket. The small space buzzed with quiet energy, locals chatting softly, the scrape of chairs on the wooden floor, and the occasional burst of laughter from the kitchen. "Good morning," Ellen greeted her warmly from behind the counter. "You're becoming a regular already." Sarah smiled. "Hard to resist the coffee and the atmosphere," Ellen handed her a steaming cup. "You'll get used to Bridgewater soon enough. It grows on you, like moss on that old bridge." Sarah chuckled, taking her coffee to a corner table by the window. She pulled out her notebook, flipping to the sketches she'd made the previous night. Her initial ideas tried to strike a balance between preservation and innovation, but the more she worked on them, the more she realized how challenging that balance would be. As she sketched, the door jingled open. She glanced up to see Mark Everett walking in. He spotted her immediately and approached with an air of cautious determination. "Morning," he said, his tone polite but still guarded. "Morning," Sarah replied. "Care to join me?" Mark hesitated but then pulled out a chair, setting his coffee on the table. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Sarah broke the silence, gesturing to her notebook. "I've been working on some ideas. Want to see?" Mark raised an eyebrow. "You're asking for my opinion." "I am," Sarah said simply. "You know this bridge and this town better than I ever could. Your input matters." Mark leaned forward, his gaze sweeping over the sketches. Sarah felt a flicker of nerves as his expression remained unreadable. Finally, he pointed to one of her designs. "This one," he said, tapping the page. "It's the closest to what the town would want. It keeps the arches, preserves the look of the stonework. But you've added these steel reinforcements. Are they visible, or can they be hidden?" "They can be hidden," Sarah replied. "The idea is to strengthen the structure without altering its appearance too much." Mark nodded, seemingly impressed. "That's a good start." The faint approval in his tone was enough to bolster Sarah's confidence. "I'll refine it further, but I'll need more insight from you and others in the town if I'm going to get this right." Mark's lips twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "You're persistent. I'll give you that. Comes with the territory," Sarah said lightly. "I've learned that good designs aren't just about materials and aesthetics. They're about people." Mark looked at her, his expression softening slightly. "Maybe you're not as out of place here as I thought." The conversation shifted, becoming less about the bridge and more about the town. Mark shared stories of Bridgewater's history, how the river had flooded decades ago, and how the old bridge had been a lifeline, allowing supplies and people to cross when everything else was underwater. Sarah listened intently, realizing how deeply intertwined the bridge was with the town's identity. After a while, Mark glanced at his watch and stood. "I've got a class to teach. But if you're serious about understanding this town, you should come to the Historical Society meeting tonight. They'll be talking about the bridge." "I'll be there," Sarah said, grateful for the invitation. That evening, Sarah arrived at the small building that housed the Bridgewater Historical Society. Inside, a group of about 20 people had gathered, their faces lighting up when Mark introduced her as the architect working on the bridge project. The room was filled with photographs, artifacts, and old maps, all testaments to the town's rich past. As the meeting began, Sarah felt both out of place and deeply honored. Residents shared their memories of the bridge, weddings photographed against its backdrop, childhood adventures beneath its arches, and moments of solace spent watching the river flow. Each story added another layer of meaning to the project. One elderly woman, Mrs. Donnelly, approached Sarah during a break. "You know," she said, her voice quavering but strong, "this bridge has been here for generations. It's seen storms, floods, and wars. It's more than stone and mortar. It's a piece of our hearts." "I understand," Sarah said sincerely. "I promise to respect what it means to everyone here." Mrs. Donnelly patted Sarah's arm. "Good. We're counting on you." By the time the meeting ended, Sarah felt both inspired and overwhelmed. The weight of the community's expectations pressed on her, but so did their trust. She left the building with a renewed determination to get it right. Back in her room that night, Sarah opened her notebook and began sketching again. The lines flowed more freely this time, each stroke imbued with the stories she had heard. She wasn't just designing a bridge anymore. She was building a connection between the past and the future, between herself and a community that was slowly letting her in. The following morning, Sarah felt the weight of the Historical Society's stories linger as she walked through the center of Bridgewater. The town seemed more alive now, its quirks and charm no longer a distant curiosity, but a backdrop for the lives she had started to glimpse. She had promised the residents she would honor their history, and that promise sat heavily on her mind. Arriving at the site of the bridge, Sarah found Tom already there, poring over technical drawings on a makeshift table he had set up. His face lit up when he saw her. "Morning! I figured you'd want to start early," he said, gesturing to the sketches spread out before him. "I was thinking about the design you showed Mark. We might need to reconsider the foundations if we're going to reinforce the arches without disrupting the stonework." Sarah leaned over the table, studying his notes. "Good point. If we excavate here," she pointed to a section of the bridge's base on the drawing, "we could strengthen the structure from underneath without altering the visible elements." Tom nodded, his enthusiasm infectious. "Exactly. I can run some calculations today to see if it's feasible." As they worked, Mark arrived, his steady gait carrying him to their makeshift workstation. "You two are up to something," he said, his tone half teasing. "Trying to keep your bridge standing for another century," Sarah replied without looking up. Mark chuckled, leaning against the table. "Glad to hear it." His presence had shifted from adversarial to something more collaborative, and Sarah found herself appreciating his input. As the morning progressed, Mark pointed out details about the bridge's original construction, sharing anecdotes about the local craftsmen who had built it by hand. By midday, Ellen arrived with sandwiches and thermoses of coffee, insisting they take a break. The four of them, Sarah, Mark, Tom, and Ellen, sat together on a grassy patch near the riverbank. The conversation flowed easily, and Sarah found herself laughing at Ellen's recounting of a disastrous town potluck where someone had accidentally spiked the punch with moonshine. "This place has a way of growing on you," Ellen said, glancing at Sarah. "You seem more at ease already." Sarah smiled, realizing it was true. For the first time in years, she wasn't rushing through her work or shielding herself from connection. She was present, fully engaged with the people and the project in a way she hadn't been in a long time. That afternoon, Sarah decided to take Mark up on an offer he'd made earlier to show her the town's archives. The small, dimly lit room at the back of the library was packed with boxes of photographs, yellowed newspapers, and bound ledgers. Mark pulled out a large book and set it on the table between them. "This is the original record of the bridge's construction," he said, flipping through the pages. "Every stone placed, every worker paid. It's all in here." Sarah ran her fingers over the delicate paper, marveling at the meticulous entries. One page caught her eye, a hand-drawn sketch of the bridge, annotated with notes in a looping, old-fashioned script. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "They cared so much about every detail," Mark nodded. "They did. That's why it's hard for so many of us to imagine replacing it. It's not just a bridge, it's a testament to their dedication." "I understand that better now," Sarah said, meeting his gaze, "and I want my design to reflect that same dedication." Mark's expression softened. "I believe you do." The exchange felt like a turning point, an unspoken truce. Sarah realized that Mark's resistance hadn't been about her personally, it was about trust, and now she had started to earn it. As evening fell, Sarah returned to her room, her mind buzzing with ideas. She sketched late into the night, refining her designs with insights from the day. Her new concept preserved the original arches while incorporating subtle reinforcements that would ensure the bridge's longevity. She imagined how it would look when completed, a bridge that honored its past while standing strong for the future. Before she went to bed, Sarah wrote a list of questions to ask the townspeople at her next meeting. She wanted their voices to shape the project, not just as a gesture of goodwill, but because their input had become vital to her vision. This wasn't just about restoring her career anymore, it was about restoring her connection to something greater than herself. As she turned out the light, a sense of quiet fulfillment settled over her. The work was far from done, but for the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was building something that truly mattered. The following morning, Sarah arrived at the site to find a group of townspeople gathered near the bridge. At first, she thought it might be another casual gathering, but as she approached, the tension in the air was palpable. Mark stood in the center of the group, arms crossed, listening intently to a tall man with a sharp, commanding voice. "Mark, this project is a disaster waiting to happen," the man said, his words laced with frustration. "You're letting an outsider decide the fate of our town's most important landmark." Sarah hesitated, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes as she stepped closer. The man turned, his sharp gaze landing on her. "You must be Sarah Hudson," he said, his tone far from welcoming. "I'm Richard Hale, and I represent those of us who think this project is a mistake." "Good to meet you, Mr. Hale," Sarah said evenly, extending her hand. He glanced at it but didn't take it, turning back to the group instead. "This bridge has stood for over 100 years without anyone meddling," Richard continued. "Now we're supposed to believe that tearing it apart is the only solution." "Tearing it apart isn't the plan," Sarah said, stepping forward. "I'm here to preserve as much of the bridge's original structure as possible while ensuring it's safe for future use." "And what makes you think you understand what this bridge means to us?" Richard challenged. "You've been here, what, a week?" Before Sarah could respond, Mark raised his hand, silencing the murmurs that had begun to ripple through the group. "Richard, she's not here to destroy the bridge. She's trying to save it in a way that works for everyone," Richard scoffed. "Since when are you the voice of reason, Mark? Weren't you the one leading the charge to keep the bridge untouched?" Mark's jaw tightened. But I've spoken with Sarah, and I believe she's genuinely trying to do what's right for this town. Maybe you should listen to her too." The group fell silent, their attention shifting to Sarah. The weight of their scrutiny pressed on her, but she took a steadying breath and began to speak. "I understand that this bridge isn't just a piece of infrastructure. It's a part of your history, your identity," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I've spent the past week listening to your stories, studying its construction, and working on a design that preserves what makes it special while addressing its structural vulnerabilities. This isn't about erasing the past, it's about making sure the bridge can stand for another 100 years. Richard folded his arms, clearly unimpressed. "And what if your plan fails? What if we lose the bridge altogether?" "It won't fail," Sarah replied. "But I also know that trust has to be earned. That's why I'm inviting everyone here to review the plans and give me your feedback. This isn't just my project, it's ours." A murmur spread through the group, some nodding while others exchanged skeptical glances. Richard didn't look convinced, but he didn't press further. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving the crowd to disperse. Mark approached Sarah as the others began to trickle back toward their day's business. "You handled that well," he said. "I don't know about that," Sarah admitted, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "He's not wrong to question me. I am an outsider." Mark shook his head. "You're not just an outsider anymore. You've been listening, learning. That's more than most people would do." Sarah gave him a small smile, grateful for his words. But the encounter with Richard had left her rattled. She knew that no matter how much effort she put into understanding the town, there would always be those who doubted her intentions. Back at her desk, later that day, Sarah began revisiting her plans, determined to address every possible concern the townspeople might raise. She added annotations explaining the rationale behind each decision and flagged areas where input from the community could further refine the design. She also reached out to Tom for additional calculations, ensuring that every detail was backed by data. That evening, she met with Ellen at the cafe to review the plans. Ellen, ever supportive, provided her own perspective. "You're on the right track," she said. "People like Richard will always resist change, but that doesn't mean the rest of us don't see what you're trying to do." "I hope you're right," Sarah said, "because convincing this town is turning out to be just as challenging as designing the bridge." Ellen laughed softly. "Welcome to Bridgewater. Nothing worth doing here is ever easy." As Sarah walked back to her room, the words echoed in her mind. Nothing worth doing was ever easy. It wasn't the reassurance she'd been hoping for, but it was enough to steel her resolve. This was more than just a project. It was a test of her perseverance, her adaptability, and her ability to truly connect. The first light of dawn broke over Bridgewater as Sarah stood on the edge of the river, the morning mist curling around her like a ghostly veil. She had come early to think, to clear her mind before the challenges of the day began. The previous encounter with Richard Hale had left her rattled, and though she had resolved to push forward, the memory of his sharp words lingered. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. Turning, she saw Tom approaching. His hands stuffed into the pockets of his jacket, he offered her a small, reassuring smile. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. "Something like that," Sarah admitted. "I needed a quiet moment." Tom nodded, stepping up beside her. "You handled yourself well yesterday. Not everyone would stand their ground like that." "Thanks," Sarah said. "But it's not just about standing my ground. I need them to believe in what we're doing." "They will," Tom said firmly. "It'll just take time." The day ahead offered no such quiet. By mid-morning, Sarah was in a cramped office at the town's municipal building, her laptop open and papers spread across the desk. She was finalizing her presentation for the next council meeting, where she would outline her updated plans and address the town's concerns. As she worked, her phone buzzed with a text from Mark. "Meeting at the Historical Society tonight. You should come," Sarah replied with a quick, "I'll be there," before turning her focus back to her notes. She had spent hours tweaking the design, ensuring that every element reflected her promise to preserve the bridge's heritage. Yet doubt still gnawed at her. Would the townspeople see her sincerity, or would Richard's resistance overshadow everything? The council meeting that afternoon was her first major test. The room was small but packed with residents, their faces a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. At the front, Richard sat with his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on Sarah as she began her presentation. She started by acknowledging the importance of the bridge, recounting some of the stories she had heard from the Historical Society. "This bridge isn't just stone and mortar," she said, her voice steady but earnest. "It's a symbol of resilience and connection. My goal is to preserve that while ensuring it can safely serve the community for generations to come." The room was quiet as Sarah walked them through her plans, explaining how the design would integrate the old with the new. She highlighted the measures to reinforce the structure without altering its iconic arches, using diagrams to illustrate how the bridge's aesthetic would remain intact. When she finished, there was a pause before the questions began. Some were practical, budget concerns, timelines, and construction logistics. Others were emotional, reflecting the deep attachment the town had to the bridge. Sarah answered each as thoughtfully as she could, drawing on everything she had learned in her short time in Bridgewater. Finally, Richard spoke up. "You say you want to preserve the bridge's history, but isn't this just a compromise? A watered-down version of what we already have?" Sarah took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "It's not about compromise, Mr. Hale. It's about adaptation. The bridge, as it stands today, can't continue to serve the town safely. By reinforcing it, we're ensuring its legacy endures, not just for us, but for future generations." The room fell silent again, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Richard didn't reply, his expression unreadable, but a few heads in the audience nodded. It wasn't a victory, but it felt like a step in the right direction. That evening, Sarah attended the Historical Society meeting, as Mark had suggested. The atmosphere was more relaxed than at the council meeting, but the conversation still centered on the bridge. Residents shared their memories and concerns, and Sarah listened intently, jotting down notes. After the meeting, Mark approached her as she gathered her things. "You're making progress," he said. Even Richard seemed less combative today. "I'll take that as a win," Sarah said with a small smile. "But there's still a lot of work to do." "There always is," Mark replied. "But you're showing people that you care, and that counts for a lot." Sarah looked at him, feeling a flicker of gratitude. His support, however reserved, meant more than she had realized. "Thanks, Mark. That means a lot coming from you." As she walked back to her room that night, Sarah reflected on the day's events. The bridge was more than a structure to the people of Bridgewater. It was a touchstone, a living memory. She had begun to understand that her role wasn't just to rebuild it, but to earn the trust of the community it represented. In her room, she opened her sketchbook and began refining her designs once more. Each line she drew felt more intentional, more grounded in the stories and values of the town. She was determined to get it right, not just for her career, but for the people who had come to trust her with something so deeply personal. As the hours ticked by, Sarah felt a quiet resolve settle over her. The challenges ahead would be formidable, but she was ready to face them. For the first time in years, she wasn't just building a bridge, she was building a connection to a place and to herself. The morning brought a heavy fog that clung to the river and softened the sharp edges of the world around Bridgewater. Sarah stood at the bridge's edge, bundled in a coat against the damp chill, her gaze fixed on the water below. The sounds of the town waking up filtered softly through the mist, doors opening, voices carrying, and the faint hum of a distant engine. The previous day's progress had been heartening, but Sarah couldn't shake the lingering unease that followed her like a shadow. It wasn't just Richard Hale's resistance or the weight of the town's expectations, it was her own doubt. Her past failures loomed larger now, every misstep and poor decision replaying in her mind as though to remind her she might stumble again. She was startled out of her thoughts by the sound of Mark Everett's voice behind her. "Lost in your own head again?" Sarah turned, offering him a wry smile. "Something like that." Mark stepped up beside her, his hands stuffed into his jacket pockets. He followed her gaze to the bridge. "It's not just a structure, is it?" "The more you look at it, the more it feels alive," Sarah nodded. "Alive and full of stories I'm trying to honor, but there's this constant fear of getting it wrong. I've made mistakes before, and those mistakes cost me everything." Mark glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "Everyone's made mistakes. The real question is what you do with them." "It's not that simple," Sarah said, her voice tinged with frustration. "I've been in situations where my choices, my failures, impacted more than just me. And now this isn't just about my career, it's about people's lives, their history." Mark nodded slowly, as though weighing her words. "I get it. When you care about something, the stakes feel higher, but that's what makes it worth doing, isn't it?" Sarah didn't reply immediately. Instead, She let the silence settle around them, the mist and the river carrying the weight of their thoughts. Finally, she spoke. "Do you ever regret staying here? Devoting so much of your life to this town?" Mark chuckled softly, a sound that carried a hint of sadness. "Every now and then, but then I remember why I stayed. This place, it's more than just home. It's where my wife and I built a life together. It's where Lily grew up. And now, it's where I'm trying to keep their memories alive." Sarah turned to him, surprised by the vulnerability in his words. Mark rarely spoke about his personal life, and she hadn't known he had lost his wife. "That must be hard," she said gently. "It is," he admitted, "but it's also grounding. This bridge, this town, it's all tied to who I am. And maybe that's why I've been so protective of it." Sarah looked back at the bridge, her mind turning over his words. "I think I've spent so much of my life running, chasing the next project, the next success, that I forgot what it's like to stand still and let something matter." Mark nodded but didn't press her further. They stood in silence for a while longer before he finally said, "Whatever you're carrying, Sarah, it doesn't have to define you. You've got a chance to build something meaningful here, for yourself and for this town." His words stayed with her as she returned to her room later that morning. She opened her laptop and pulled up the presentation she had given to the council, scrutinizing every detail. The doubts still nagged at her, but she tried to channel them into focus. If she was going to make this work, she couldn't afford to let her fears dictate her actions. That afternoon, Sarah met with Tom at the site to review the latest engineering reports. The numbers were daunting, the budget constraints left little room for error, and the timeline was unforgiving. But as they worked through the data, Tom's optimism buoyed her spirits. "We're closer than we think," Tom said, pointing to a set of revised calculations. "If we can get the council to approve this adjustment, we'll have the flexibility to strengthen the foundation without overshooting the budget." Sarah smiled at his enthusiasm. "You're right. Let's focus on presenting this at the next meeting." Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah found herself back at the Historical Society's archives. The dusty room felt like a sanctuary, its shelves lined with the weight of decades. She pulled out a box of photographs and sifted through them, finding images of the bridge in its earliest days. One photograph caught her attention, a group of workers standing proudly in front of the newly completed structure, their faces weathered but smiling. It struck her how much effort had gone into building the bridge, how many hands had shaped it. It wasn't just a feat of engineering, it was a testament to the collective spirit of a community. For the first time, Sarah felt a deep connection to those who had come before her. Their legacy wasn't just in the stone, it was in the resilience and hope they had poured into it. As she left the archives that evening, Sarah felt a shift within herself. The shadows of her past hadn't disappeared, but they no longer felt as insurmountable. This project wasn't about erasing her failures or proving herself to others. It was about creating something that mattered, something that would stand as a bridge, not just between two sides of a river, but between the past and the future, and maybe even between the person she had been and the one she wanted to become. The next morning, Sarah awoke to the sound of rain pounding against her window. The grey skies seemed to mirror the heaviness in her chest as she prepared for another long day. The council meeting had left her feeling cautiously optimistic, but as she reviewed her notes at the small desk in her room, the magnitude of the project loomed larger than ever. The bridge wasn't just a structure to the people of Bridgewater. It was their history, their connection, their identity. And she was tasked with the impossible, preserving its essence while ensuring it could stand the test of time. Mid-morning found Sarah at the bridge site with Tom, rain jackets shielding them from the persistent drizzle. The two reviewed the latest updates to the project, but the weather added complications. The river was higher than usual, its currents strong and churning. A few stray branches floated downstream, and Sarah couldn't help but imagine what the river might do in a real storm. "This is why the foundation is critical," Tom said, shouting slightly to be heard over the rain. "If the structure isn't reinforced soon, even a moderate flood could compromise it." Sarah nodded, the urgency settling in her stomach like a stone. "We'll need to bring this up at the next council meeting. The timeline might have to shift." Tom hesitated. Shifting the timeline could mean increasing costs. "You know how tight the budget is." Sarah sighed, wiping rain from her face. "I know, but we can't compromise on safety." The weather wasn't the only obstacle that day. When Sarah returned to the cafe for lunch, she was met with a frosty reception from a group of older townsfolk seated by the window. Their voices were low, but Sarah caught snippets of their conversation. "She's just another outsider, making promises she can't keep," one man muttered. "She'll probably leave before it's done," another said, shaking his head. The words stung, even though Sarah tried to brush them off. As she sat at a table with Ellen, her appetite had all but disappeared. "Don't pay them any mind," Ellen said gently, noticing Sarah's distraction. "They've seen a lot of people come through here, promising change. It's hard for them to trust anyone new." "I understand that," Sarah said quietly, "but it's frustrating. I'm putting everything I have into this, and it feels like no matter what I do, it's not enough." Ellen reached across the table, her hand warm on Sarah's. "It'll take time, but they'll see. You're not here to tear anything down. You're here to build something lasting. That matters." Ellen's words were kind, but Sarah couldn't shake the doubt that lingered as she walked back to the bridge site. The rain had let up, but the grey clouds remained, casting a somber light over the town. She found herself standing at the riverbank again, watching the water rush by. It reminded her of the chaos she felt inside, rushing currents of doubt and fear, threatening to pull her under. Mark found her there, his footsteps soft on the wet grass. "You look like you're about to throw in the towel," he said lightly. Sarah laughed bitterly. "It's crossed my mind." Mark stood beside her, his gaze steady on the water. "It's not supposed to be easy, you know. Anything worth building takes work, sweat, mistakes, second-guessing yourself." "That's reassuring," Sarah said with a small, wry smile. Mark shrugged. "It's the truth. This town, this bridge, it's seen its share of struggles, but it's still standing. You'll get there too." Sarah turned to him, her expression serious. "Do you really believe that?" "That I can do this?" Mark met her eyes, his own steady and calm. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't." The simplicity of his answer carried more weight than any long-winded reassurance could have. Sarah nodded, a flicker of gratitude breaking through the storm of her emotions. The rest of the day was a blur of meetings and adjustments. Tom ran new calculations, Ellen stopped by with coffee, and Sarah kept herself busy fine-tuning the designs. But as the hours passed, the weight of everything she hadn't solved yet pressed down on her. The foundation reinforcements, the budget constraints, the mounting resistance from some members of the community. It all felt insurmountable. That evening, Sarah returned to her room, exhaustion pulling at every fiber of her being. She sat at her desk, staring at the open sketchbook before her. Her pencil hovered over the page, but her hand refused to move. The lines and ideas that had flowed so easily before now felt distant, as though she had lost the thread of her vision. In frustration, she slammed the sketchbook shut and leaned back in her chair, her hands rubbing her face. She felt the sting of tears, hot and unbidden, slipping down her cheeks. For months, she had poured herself into this project, hoping it would be the redemption she desperately needed. But now, standing at the edge of failure again, she wasn't sure she had the strength to see it through. Her phone buzzed on the desk, the screen lighting up with a text from Claire. "Keep going, Sarah. You're stronger than you think." Sarah stared at the message, her tears blurring the words. She didn't feel strong. She felt like a woman standing on the edge of a collapsing bridge, unsure if she had the courage to take the next step. But as she sat there, the echoes of Claire's words, of Mark's quiet belief, and of the townspeople's trust began to stir something inside her. The fear didn't disappear, but it began to shift, less a weight pulling her down, and more a challenge daring her to rise. She opened the sketchbook again, her pencil moving hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. The design began to take shape, each line a step forward, each detail a small victory. The bridge wasn't finished, and neither was she, but she was still standing, and for now that was enough. The morning light seeped through the curtains, warm and golden, a stark contrast to Sarah's inner turmoil. She had worked late into the night, refining her designs until her hand ached, but she had finally found something that felt right. The plan wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was the closest she had come to blending safety, preservation, and the essence of what the bridge meant to Bridgewater. She poured herself a cup of coffee and stared at the sketches spread across the small desk in her room. The design incorporated the original stone arches with subtle reinforcements hidden beneath the surface. A new pedestrian walkway curved along the side, allowing residents to experience the bridge up close while maintaining its function for vehicles. The structure was elegant yet grounded, a reflection of the town itself. Tom arrived at the site just as Sarah was rolling out the updated blueprints on their makeshift workstation. His eyes lit up as he scanned the new plans. "This is it," he said, his tone filled with admiration. "This is the balance we've been trying to find." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "It's a step closer, at least. Now we just need to convince the council and the rest of the town." Tom nodded, but his expression turned serious. "Richard's going to fight this tooth and nail. You know that, right?" "I do," Sarah said, her voice steady. "But I'm ready for him." That afternoon, Sarah presented her updated designs to a smaller group of council members and community representatives. Ellen sat near the back, offering a reassuring smile, while Mark stood by the door, his presence a silent show of support. Richard Hale, as expected, sat front and center, his arms crossed and his expression guarded. Sarah began with the technical details, carefully explaining how the design addressed the bridge's structural vulnerabilities. She used clear visuals to demonstrate how the reinforcements would remain hidden, preserving the bridge's original appearance. Then she transitioned into the emotional aspect, referencing the stories and memories shared by the town. "This bridge isn't just a way to cross the river," she said, her voice steady but heartfelt. "It's a reflection of the strength and history of Bridgewater. My goal is to ensure it stands strong for future generations, without losing what makes it so special." When she finished, the room was silent for a moment before the questions began. Most were practical, but a few touched on the deeper, more emotional aspects of the design. Sarah answered each one as thoughtfully as she could, drawing on everything she had learned from her time in the town. Finally, Richard spoke. "You've put a lot of thought into this, Ms. Hudson," he said, his tone measured. "But no matter how much you tweak the design, it's still a compromise, and compromises rarely satisfy anyone." Sarah met his gaze, her voice firm but calm. "It's true that no solution is perfect, but this isn't about compromise. It's about adaptation. The bridge is part of your history, yes, but it also needs to serve your future. This design does both." Richard leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "We'll see." The meeting adjourned, and Sarah stepped outside, the crisp air filling her lungs. Mark joined her a moment later. "You held your own," he said, Even Richard couldn't poke too many holes in your plan. I'll take that as a win, Sarah said, though the tension in her shoulders hadn't entirely eased. That's because it is, Mark replied. Now it's just a matter of time. The following days were a whirlwind of adjustments, meetings, and community discussions. Slowly but surely, Sarah began to see a shift. More townspeople approached her with questions, their initial skepticism giving way to curiosity and even cautious optimism. Ellen shared stories of customers who had started to warm up to the idea, and Tom reported that the council was leaning toward approval. Still, Sarah knew better than to let her guard down. The project had come a long way, but it wasn't out of the woods yet. One evening, Sarah found herself walking along the riverbank, the bridge silhouetted against the setting sun. She paused midway and leaned against the railing, letting the quiet envelop her. The water below rushed steadily, its rhythm both soothing and relentless. It reminded her of the challenges she had faced, persistent, unyielding, but not insurmountable. Mark appeared beside her, as if sensing she needed the company. "Looks like you've made quite an impression on the town," he said. "Let's hope it's a good one," Sarah replied, her tone light but sincere. "It is," Mark assured her. "They see the work you're putting in, and they see that you care." They stood in silence for a moment before Mark spoke again, his voice softer. "You know, I wasn't sure about you when you first showed up. Thought you'd be like the others, someone who talks a good game but doesn't follow through." "And now?" Sarah asked, glancing at him. "Now I see someone who's willing to fight for what matters," Mark said simply. "That's rare, and it's exactly what this town needed." Sarah felt a warmth in his words that eased some of the tension she'd been carrying. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of gold and pink, Sarah stood on the bridge and allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. The road ahead would still be difficult, but she was no longer walking it alone. The bridge was taking shape, not just in her designs, but in the bonds she was forming with the people of Bridgewater. The hum of a generator echoed through the chilly morning air as Sarah and Tom stood near the bridge, reviewing the latest set of engineering calculations. The project was at a critical juncture. With the council's decision approaching, Sarah had to finalize her plans and convince the last few holdouts in the town. Tom pointed to the blueprint spread out on the makeshift table between them. "We've run the numbers again, and with the adjustments to the foundation supports, this should hold even during severe flooding." "That's good news," Sarah said, nodding as she studied the calculations. "But convincing everyone this is the right path is another challenge entirely." Tom gave her a wry smile. "You've won over most of them. Even Richard hasn't said much lately, and that's saying something." Sarah appreciated Tom's optimism, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was still ahead. As she stood there, staring at the blueprints, she felt the weight of the project pressing on her shoulders. It wasn't just about completing the design, it was about proving to herself and to the people of Bridgewater that she could see it through. By midday, Sarah found herself at the town hall for a final pre-decision meeting with the council. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every sound seem louder. Council members leafed through the revised plans, their expressions varying from thoughtful to skeptical. "This design addresses our safety concerns and preserves much of the original structure," Sarah explained, her voice calm but firm. "The costs are within the revised budget, and we've accounted for potential delays due to weather or other unforeseen issues." Roy, the elder councilman who had been cautiously supportive from the start, nodded thoughtfully. "It's a solid plan, but there's still one issue." Richard Hale leaned forward, his steely gaze fixed on Sarah. "You're asking us to trust that this will work. But if it doesn't, we lose the bridge entirely. That's a risk we can't afford to take. I understand your concerns, Sarah replied, meeting his gaze, but doing nothing is an even greater risk. The bridge is deteriorating. Without intervention, it won't survive another decade, let alone another century. This plan gives us the best chance to protect its legacy. Richard's lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't respond. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that made Sarah's heart race. After what felt like an eternity, Roy spoke up. I think we've heard enough. Let's put it to a vote. The council members exchanged glances before nodding in agreement. The meeting adjourned, with the decision to be announced at the town hall gathering the next evening. Sarah left the building feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. The fate of the bridge and her role in its future now rested in the hands of the council. That evening, Ellen insisted on hosting a dinner at her cafe to celebrate how far they had come. The small gathering included Mark, Tom, and a few other supporters who had been instrumental in rallying the town. The cafe was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the cold tension Sarah had felt in the council meeting. You've done everything you can, Ellen said, placing a comforting hand on Sarah's shoulder. Now it's up to them. Sarah nodded, though the knot in her stomach remained. It's hard to let go, she admitted. This project has become so much more than I ever imagined. That's how you know it matters, Mark said from across the table. His tone was steady, his expression reassuring. You've put your heart into this, win or lose. That won't go unnoticed. The words settled over Sarah like a balm, easing some of her anxiety. She stayed late at the cafe, surrounded by the laughter and warmth of the group, but her thoughts remained tethered to the bridge. The next day dawned clear and bright, as though the universe itself was offering a reprieve from the tension. Sarah spent the morning fine-tuning her presentation for the town hall, knowing that this would be her final chance to sway any lingering doubts. The gathering was packed, with residents filling every seat and lining the walls. The buzz of conversation quieted as Roy stood to address the crowd. Tonight, we make an important decision for the future of our town, he began. We've heard from Sarah Hudson, our council members, and many of you. Now, it's time to decide the path forward. Sarah stepped up to the podium, her palms slightly damp, but her voice steady. She spoke from the heart, recounting the stories she had heard from the historical society, the fishermen, and the families who had called Bridgewater home for generations. This bridge isn't just about getting from one side of the river to the other, she said. It's about what connects us, our history, our community, and our hope for the future. This design isn't just mine, it's ours. It's shaped by your stories, your memories, and your values. As she finished, the room erupted into applause, though Sarah noticed Richard sitting silently, his expression unreadable. She returned to her seat, her heart pounding as the council prepared to vote. The process was swift, but every second felt like an eternity. When Roy finally announced the decision to move forward with Sarah's plan, the room burst into cheers. Relief flooded Sarah's chest, mingling with an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Mark approached her as the crowd began to disperse. "Congratulations," he said simply, his smile soft but genuine. "Thank you," Sarah replied, her voice thick with emotion. "But this is just the beginning." Mark nodded. "It always is, but you've proven you're ready for it." As the night wore on, Sarah stood by the bridge one more time, watching the river flow beneath its ancient arches. The path ahead would be long and challenging, but for the first time, she felt truly prepared to walk it. The weeks following the council's decision moved at a breakneck pace. With the plan approved, the project entered its next critical phase, implementation. Sarah found herself managing a delicate balance of logistics, engineering challenges, and the ever-watchful eyes of the Bridgewater community. The first major hurdle came almost immediately. Excavation for the foundation reinforcements revealed unexpected structural weaknesses in the riverbed. The soil, already compromised by years of flooding, wouldn't support the weight of the planned upgrades without additional measures. The discovery threw the timeline into chaos and threatened to push the project well over budget. Sarah spent hours poring over the data with Tom, their conversations punctuated by sighs and the occasional frustrated exclamation. "We'll have to re-engineer the entire support system," Tom said, rubbing his temples as they sat in the cramped project office near the bridge site. Sarah stared at the blueprints, her mind racing. "We can't afford that kind of delay. The council barely approved the budget as it is." Tom nodded grimly. "I know. But without a solution, the whole thing could collapse. Literally." The news quickly spread through the town, fueling whispers of doubt among the residents. At the cafe, Sarah overheard snippets of conversations laced with concern and skepticism. "I knew this would happen," one man muttered over his coffee. "We should have left the bridge alone." "They're in over their heads," another replied. "And we're the ones who'll pay the price." The weight of their words settled heavily on Sarah's shoulders. She had fought so hard to win their trust, and now it felt as though it was slipping through her fingers. That evening, she met with Mark at the Historical Society's archives. He had noticed the strain in her voice when she'd called earlier, and now he watched her carefully as she explained the situation. "Sounds like you're hitting the wall," Mark said, leaning back in his chair. Sarah let out a bitter laugh. "Hitting it? I think I've smashed right through it." Mark studied her for a moment before speaking. "You've been through worse, haven't you? I've seen how you handle pressure. You're not the type to give up." "I don't know," Sarah admitted, her voice low. "This feels different. I've put everything I have into this, and now it's falling apart." Mark leaned forward, his tone firm but gentle. "It's not falling apart, it's hitting a snag. Big projects always do. The difference is whether you let it stop you." His words stirred something in Sarah, a flicker of determination that had been buried beneath layers of doubt. "We'll find a way," she said finally, more to herself than to him. Mark nodded. "I know you will." The next morning, Sarah and Tom regrouped with the engineering team. After hours of brainstorming, they developed a contingency plan, adding a lightweight steel framework to support the stone arches without overloading the weakened soil. It wasn't an ideal solution, but it was feasible within the budget and timeline. When Sarah presented the revised plan to the council later that week, she braced for resistance. Richard Hale, predictably, was the first to voice his concerns. "This wasn't part of the original proposal," he said, his tone sharp. "How can we trust that this will work when the first plan didn't?" Sarah met his gaze, her voice steady. "The first plan didn't fail. It revealed a challenge we hadn't anticipated. This solution addresses that challenge while preserving the integrity of the original design. It's not about avoiding obstacles, it's about overcoming them." The room was silent for a moment before Roy spoke up. "I think we owe Ms. Hudson the chance to see this through. She's proven she's committed to getting it right." After a tense vote, the council approved the revised plan. Sarah left the meeting feeling both relief and exhaustion. The path forward was clearer now, but the pressure to deliver had never been greater. Construction resumed the following day, and Sarah threw herself into the work with renewed focus. She spent long hours at the site, overseeing every detail and ensuring the team adhered to the revised specifications. The bridge, once a quiet symbol of the town's history, now buzzed with activity as workers drilled, reinforced, and rebuilt. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah stood on the bridge, watching the workers pack up for the night. The steel framework was beginning to take shape, blending seamlessly with the stone arches. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a small smile. Progress was slow but steady, and the vision she had fought so hard for was starting to materialize. Mark joined her a few minutes later, his presence as steadying as ever. "It's coming together," he said, his voice quiet but filled with admiration. "It is," Sarah replied, "but there's still so much to do." "There always is," Mark said with a shrug. "But you've shown this town what you're made of." "Even Richard's been quieter lately," Sarah laughed softly. "I'll take that as a good sign." As they stood there, watching the river flow beneath the bridge, Sarah felt a sense of clarity she hadn't experienced in a long time. The road ahead would still be challenging, but for the first time, she truly believed she had the strength to see it through. The construction site was quieter now, the workers having finished for the day. The late evening light painted the bridge in soft golds and ambers, casting long shadows that stretched toward the riverbank. Sarah stood near the edge of the site, watching the water rush steadily beneath the newly installed framework. The bridge was beginning to transform, its revitalization taking shape before her eyes. But the stillness around her belied the turbulence within. Despite the progress, Sarah couldn't help but feel the strain of the past few weeks. The unexpected challenges, the weight of community expectations, and the relentless pressure to succeed had left her feeling frayed. The bridge might have been standing stronger with each passing day, but Sarah felt as though she were barely holding herself together. Ellen's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Mind if I join you?" Sarah turned to see her standing a few feet away, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. She offered one to Sarah with a warm smile. "Thanks," Sarah said, taking the cup and breathing in the familiar, comforting aroma. Ellen gestured toward the bridge. "It's looking good." "It is," Sarah admitted, "but it's not finished yet, and until it is, I can't let myself feel too relieved." Ellen chuckled softly. "You've got to give yourself a little credit, Sarah. What you've done here, it's nothing short of remarkable." Sarah sighed, staring into her coffee. "I don't know. Sometimes it feels like I'm just holding everything together with duct tape and hope." "Well, hope's gotten this town through a lot worse," Ellen said, her tone gentle but firm. "And from what I've seen, you're stronger than you think." Sarah looked at Ellen, her words sinking in. "I don't feel strong most days. I feel like I'm one mistake away from letting everyone down." "Maybe," Ellen said, shrugging lightly, "but you keep showing up anyway. That's what makes the difference." The 2 women stood in comfortable silence for a while, the quiet hum of the river filling the space between them. Eventually, Ellen patted Sarah's arm and excused herself, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts once more. As the evening deepened, Mark arrived, his familiar presence grounding her. He approached slowly, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. "Thought I might find you here," he said. "Where else would I be?" Sarah replied with a faint smile. Mark leaned against the railing beside her, his gaze fixed on the bridge. "You've come a long way." "We have," Sarah corrected. "I didn't do this alone." "No," Mark agreed, "but you're the one who made it possible, and you're the one who'll see it through." His words carried a weight of sincerity that made Sarah pause. She turned to him, her brow furrowed slightly. "Do you really believe that?" Mark met her eyes, his expression steady. "I do. You've shown this town what you're made of, what you're willing to fight for. That kind of determination doesn't go unnoticed." Sarah felt a flicker of warmth at his words, though doubt still lingered. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing this more for me than for the town, if I'm just trying to prove something to myself." Mark tilted his head thoughtfully. "Maybe you are. But is that so bad? Proving to yourself that you can take on something this big, something this meaningful, that's not selfish, That's growth. The thought stayed with Sarah as the night wore on. She had always framed her journey in terms of redemption, a way to make up for past failures and prove her worth. But perhaps Mark was right. Perhaps this project wasn't just about fixing what was broken, it was about becoming something stronger, something more resilient. The next day, Sarah arrived at the site early, her resolve renewed. The workers greeted her warmly as she made her rounds, checking on the progress and addressing any lingering concerns. The bridge's transformation was undeniable now. The steel framework seamlessly blended with the stone, and the pedestrian walkway was beginning to take shape. It was no longer just a vision in her sketchbook. It was a reality. Later that afternoon, Sarah met with Tom to review the final stages of construction. His enthusiasm was infectious as he walked her through the remaining tasks. "We're ahead of schedule on the foundation reinforcements," he said, pointing to the latest updates on his tablet. "If everything holds, we might even finish under budget." Sarah raised an eyebrow, a rare grin spreading across her face. "Are you telling me we'll have something to celebrate for once?" Tom laughed. "I think we already do." As the day came to a close, Sarah returned to her room and opened her sketchbook. Flipping through its pages, she traced the evolution of the project, the early, tentative designs, the detailed revisions, and finally, the finalized plans that were now coming to life. It was a tangible reminder of how far she had come, not just as an architect, but as a person. Before closing the book, she wrote a note at the bottom of the last page: "Trust the process, keep showing up." With those words, Sarah felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. The journey wasn't over, but she was no longer afraid of what lay ahead. She was ready to face it, one step at a time. The sun was high as Sarah stood on the bridge, her hands gripping the smooth railing. Below her, the river sparkled, its gentle current a stark contrast to the storm of emotions swirling inside her. The project was entering its final stages, and with each day, the bridge looked more like the vision she had poured herself into. But it wasn't just the bridge that had transformed. Sarah felt the shift within herself, subtle but undeniable. Lost in thought again, Mark's voice came from behind her, breaking the quiet. He approached with his usual steady gait, a faint smile playing on his lips. Sarah turned, offering a small smile of her own. "Just taking it all in. It's hard to believe we're almost there." Mark leaned against the railing beside her, his gaze sweeping over the bridge. "It's incredible how much has changed. Not just the bridge, everything." Sarah tilted her head, curious. "Everything?" Mark nodded. "The way people talk about it now. At first, it was all doubt and resistance, but now people are starting to believe in it, in what it represents." "That's a relief," Sarah admitted. "There were moments I wasn't sure it would ever happen." Mark glanced at her, his expression softening. "You didn't give up. That's what made the difference." His words settled over Sarah like a warm blanket, quieting the lingering doubts that still surfaced in her quieter moments. "It wasn't just me," she said. "It was all of us. You, Tom, Ellen, the council, even Richard in his own way." Mark chuckled. "I think Richard would argue with that." "Maybe," Sarah said with a grin, "but I like to think he cares more than he lets on." The two stood in companionable silence, the sounds of the town drifting toward them, the hum of cars, the laughter of children, and the faint clang of tools as workers completed the final touches on the bridge. As the day wore on, Sarah joined Tom and the rest of the crew at the base of the bridge, where they were securing the last sections of the pedestrian walkway. Tom's enthusiasm was infectious as he showed Sarah how the walkway seamlessly integrated with the original design. "This is going to be a game changer," Tom said, gesturing to the curved path. "People won't just cross the bridge, they'll experience it." Sarah nodded, pride welling up inside her. That was the goal, to make it more than just functional. "And you did," Tom said, his tone earnest. "This is something people will talk about for years." Later that evening, the town hosted an informal gathering at the park near the bridge. It was a celebration of how far the project had come, a chance for the community to reflect on the journey. Ellen had outdone herself, providing tables of food and drinks, while local musicians played soft tunes in the background. Sarah found herself at the center of conversations, answering questions about the design and listening to residents share their excitement about the bridge's completion. Even Richard approached her, his demeanor more subdued than usual. "You've proven me wrong," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "I didn't think it could be done." Sarah smiled, surprised by his admission. "It couldn't have been done without everyone's input." "This is as much your bridge as it is mine," Richard nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "It's a good bridge," he said simply, before walking away. As the evening stretched on, Sarah found herself sitting on a bench by the river, the sounds of the gathering fading into the background. Mark joined her, a cup of coffee in his hand. "Big night," he said, handing her a second cup. "It is," Sarah agreed, taking a sip. "But there's still work to be done." "There always is," Mark said, his voice steady, "but it's worth taking a moment to appreciate what you've accomplished." Sarah glanced at him, her heart full but her words hesitant. "I don't think I've let myself do that yet. It's always been about the next step, the next challenge." Mark smiled. "Maybe it's time to stop running and let yourself be proud." The words hit Sarah harder than she expected. For years, she had been driven by the need to prove herself, to her peers, her family, and most of all, herself. But sitting there, with the bridge standing strong behind her and the town coming together around her, she realized that she didn't need to run anymore. She had found what she was searching for, not just redemption, but a sense of belonging. The night ended with a quiet walk back to her room. Sarah paused at the foot of the bridge, taking one last look before heading inside. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it. The bridge had become more than just a project. It was a testament to resilience, connection, and the strength it took to rebuild. As Sarah climbed the stairs to her room, she carried with her the quiet satisfaction of knowing she hadn't just built a bridge. She had built a new foundation for herself, one that was stronger and more enduring than she had ever imagined. The bridge stood illuminated against the early morning sky, its arches casting long shadows over the still river below. Sarah arrived at the site before sunrise, her breath visible in the cool air. Today marked the beginning of the final phase of construction, and with it came a mix of relief and anticipation. The months of planning, setbacks, and persistence had led to this moment. Tom was already there, holding a clipboard and directing a group of workers who were positioning the last pieces of the pedestrian walkway. He waved Sarah over as she approached. "Morning!" he called out, his tone bright despite the early hour. "You're just in time. We're about to secure the final section." Sarah smiled, the sight of the near-completed bridge filling her with a sense of pride. "It looks incredible, Tom. I can't believe we're almost there." "Neither can I," Tom admitted, "but seeing it all come together, it makes the sleepless nights worth it." As they walked along the bridge, inspecting the progress, Sarah's mind buzzed with a checklist of tasks. The grand reopening ceremony was just days away, and every detail had to be perfect. Invitations had gone out to local dignitaries, neighboring towns, and even a few state officials. The event wasn't just about the bridge. It was about celebrating the resilience of Bridgewater and its people. "I've been thinking about the ceremony," Sarah said to Tom as they reached the midpoint of the bridge. We need to emphasize the community's role in this project. It wouldn't have happened without them. Tom nodded. Absolutely. And you should take some credit too, Sarah. You've done more than anyone to make this a reality. Sarah shook her head, her humility genuine. It wasn't just me, Mark, Ellen, the council. They all played a part. And let's not forget you. Tom grinned. Fine. I'll accept some of the glory. But seriously, Sarah, you've earned this. As the day unfolded, Sarah shifted between overseeing final adjustments and preparing her remarks for the ceremony. She spent part of the afternoon with Ellen, who had volunteered to coordinate the reception. The cafe owner's enthusiasm was contagious as she rattled off plans for food, decorations, and live music. This town hasn't had a reason to celebrate like this in years, Ellen said, arranging a list of vendors on her countertop. You're giving them something to be proud of, Sarah. Sarah smiled, touched by Ellen's words. It's their bridge. I just helped it along. Ellen paused, her expression softening. Maybe, but you brought more than just plans and blueprints. You brought hope, and that's something this town needed just as much as the bridge. That evening, Sarah found herself walking along the riverbank, the sounds of construction fading into the background. She hadn't expected to feel so connected to this place when she first arrived. Bridgewater had been a chance to escape, to rebuild her career after her failure in Chicago, but somewhere along the way, it had become more than that. The town and its people had worked their way into her heart, and she realized she didn't want to leave once the project was complete. As if on cue, Mark appeared on the path ahead, his silhouette outlined by the fading light. He carried 2 cups of coffee, offering one to Sarah with a small smile. You've got a knack for showing up at just the right moment, Sarah said, accepting the cup. Years of practice, Mark replied. Besides, I figured you could use the company. They walked together along the riverbank, the bridge casting its reflection in the water. Sarah glanced at Mark, his calm presence a source of comfort. Have you ever thought about leaving Bridgewater? She asked, her tone curious. Mark shook his head. Not seriously. This place, it's home. And it's where I'm needed, Sarah nodded, her thoughts turning inward. I used to think home was wherever my career took me, but now I'm not so sure. Mark stopped, his gaze steady as he looked at her. You've found something here, haven't you? Sarah met his eyes, her voice soft. I think I have. I came here looking for a second chance, but I found something better, a purpose. Mark's expression softened, his voice low but firm. Then maybe it's time to stop looking for the next thing and let yourself stay. The words stayed with Sarah long after Mark had gone. That night, as she reviewed her notes for the ceremony, she realized that her journey wasn't just about the bridge. It was about finding a foundation within herself. She had been so focused on proving her worth that she hadn't seen how far she had already come. The next morning, Sarah stood on the bridge as the workers completed the final touches. The air buzzed with anticipation, the weight of the project's culmination hanging in the air. As the sun rose higher, casting the bridge in a warm glow, Sarah felt a quiet certainty settle over her. This was more than just a project. It was a beginning. The morning of the grand reopening dawned bright and crisp, the kind of day that felt destined for new beginnings. Sarah arrived at the site early, her nerves a mix of excitement and trepidation. The bridge stood ready, its freshly reinforced arches gleaming in the sunlight. Crews had worked tirelessly in the final days to ensure every detail was perfect. And now the stage was set for the community to gather and celebrate. The town buzzed with activity as residents streamed toward the site, many dressed in their Sunday best. Vendors had set up booths with snacks and drinks, and Ellen's cafe team manned a table piled high with baked goods. Children darted through the crowd, their laughter echoing against the backdrop of the bridge. Sarah stood near the podium, reviewing her speech one last time. Her words were simple but heartfelt, designed to honor the town's history while celebrating the bridge's transformation. Yet, a knot of anxiety tightened in her chest. This wasn't just about the bridge. It was about everything it represented: resilience, connection, and the power of community. "Looking sharp," Tom said as he approached, grinning in his neatly pressed shirt and tie. "You ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Sarah replied, managing a small smile. The ceremony began promptly at noon. Roy, the councilman, took to the podium first, his voice booming with pride as he addressed the crowd. "Today, we celebrate more than just a bridge," he said. "We celebrate the spirit of Bridgewater, a community that came together to preserve its history while building a path to the future." The crowd erupted into applause, and Sarah felt a swell of emotion as Roy introduced her as the project's architect. She took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone, the sea of faces blurring slightly before her. "Thank you, Roy, and thank you to everyone in Bridgewater," she began, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. "When I first came here, I saw this bridge as a design challenge, a technical problem to solve. But it became so much more than that. It became a story of resilience, of history, and of hope." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "This bridge isn't just stone and steel. It's a testament to what we can achieve when we come together. It's a connection, not just across the river, but across generations." The crowd clapped warmly, and Sarah stepped back, her heart pounding. She caught Mark's eye in the crowd, his nod of approval steadying her nerves. The ceremony continued with speeches from other council members and a blessing from the local pastor. Then, it was time for the ribbon cutting. Sarah joined Roy and a few other town leaders at the base of the bridge. A long red ribbon stretched across the entrance. The mayor handed Sarah the ceremonial scissors, and as she cut through the ribbon, cheers erupted around her. For the next hour, the bridge came alive with activity. Families strolled across it, pausing to take in the view of the river. Children raced along the pedestrian walkway, their shouts of delight filling the air. Sarah wandered through the crowd, taking in the scene with a mixture of pride and relief. "You did it," Ellen said, appearing at her side with a plate of cookies, "and you should be proud." "I am," Sarah admitted, her voice soft. "But it wasn't just me. This was a team effort." Ellen smiled knowingly. "Maybe. But every team needs a leader, and you were the right one for this job." As the afternoon wore on, the crowd began to thin, and Sarah found herself standing on the bridge's midpoint, gazing out at the river. Mark joined her, his hands tucked into his pockets. "It's a beautiful sight," he said, his voice quiet. "It is," Sarah agreed. "I think this is the first time I've really stopped to appreciate it." Mark glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "You've been running for a long time, haven't you?" Sarah nodded, the weight of his observation hitting her. "I think I was always afraid that if I stopped, everything would fall apart. But here, with this, it feels different." "Because it is," Mark said simply. "You've built something lasting here, not just for the town, but for yourself." Sarah turned to him, her voice soft. "I didn't expect to find that here. I didn't expect to find any of this." Mark's smile was warm, his gaze steady. "Sometimes the best things are the ones we don't see coming." The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting the bridge in a golden glow. Sarah felt a deep sense of peace settle over her, the kind that came from knowing she had done something meaningful. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about the next project or the next challenge. She was simply present, rooted in the moment. As the last of the crowd departed, Sarah lingered on the bridge, her footsteps slow and deliberate. The arches above her stood strong, a testament to the work and care that had gone into their preservation. The river below flowed steadily, carrying the promise of continuity and renewal. She turned one last time to look at the town, its lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk. Bridgewater had given her a second chance, but it had also given her something more, a place to belong, a community to connect with, and a bridge not just to cross, but to build her future upon. The morning after the grand reopening, Sarah woke to the gentle sound of rain tapping against her window. The town was quieter now, the buzz of the previous day's celebration having faded into a peaceful calm. Sarah stretched and sat up, savoring the rare moment of stillness. For the first time in what felt like years, she didn't feel the weight of unfinished tasks pressing down on her. She dressed quickly and headed to Ellen's cafe, the familiar comfort of the place drawing her in. When she walked through the door, Ellen greeted her with a warm smile and a steaming cup of coffee. "Good morning, bridge builder," Ellen said, sliding the cup across the counter. "How does it feel to wake up and not have a million things to do?" Sarah laughed softly. "Strange, but nice. I don't think it's hit me yet that the project is really done." Ellen leaned on the counter, her expression thoughtful. "It might be done, but you've left something behind, a piece of yourself, and I think the town's better for it." Sarah took a sip of her coffee, Ellen's words settling in her chest. She had spent so much time focused on the bridge, on proving herself, that she hadn't fully considered the impact of her work on the people around her. Now, sitting in the cafe, surrounded by the town's quiet life, she could see it clearly. As the morning went on, Sarah wandered through Bridgewater, stopping to chat with familiar faces. Mrs. Donnelly waved her over from her garden, her hands dirtied from planting new flowers. Tom passed by in his truck, honking and flashing a grin. Even Richard Hale gave her a polite nod as he walked into the general store. Each interaction was a reminder of how far she had come, not just in completing the bridge, but in becoming a part of the community. Later that afternoon, Sarah found herself back at the bridge, standing in the middle of the walkway. The rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and cool. The river below was calm, its surface reflecting the pale grey sky. She leaned on the railing, her thoughts drifting. Mark appeared beside her, his steps quiet but deliberate. He didn't speak right away, simply joining her in gazing out at the river. "Still admiring your work?" he asked finally, a hint of amusement in his tone. Sarah smiled. "Maybe a little, but it doesn't feel like just mine anymore. It belongs to the town." Mark nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You've given them more than a bridge, you know. You've given them something to believe in." Sarah turned to him, her voice soft. "And what about you? What do you believe in, Mark?" He met her gaze, his eyes steady. "Right now, I believe in what you've done here, and I believe in you." The words caught Sarah off guard, their sincerity leaving her momentarily speechless. She looked back at the river, a small smile playing on her lips. "Thank you. That means more than I can say." They stood in comfortable silence for a while longer, the sounds of the town drifting toward them. Sarah felt a deep sense of contentment, the kind that came not from achievement, but from connection. As the day faded into evening, Sarah walked back toward the heart of Bridgewater, her steps slow and deliberate. The town lights were beginning to glow, casting a warm, inviting light on the streets. For the first time in years, Sarah wasn't thinking about what came next. She wasn't running toward or away from anything. She was simply here, present in a place that had come to feel like home. The days following the grand reopening settled into a quiet rhythm. With the bridge completed, the hum of construction had faded, replaced by the sounds of everyday life. Sarah found herself adjusting to a slower pace, one that felt foreign after years of relentless deadlines and high-pressure projects. Ellen's cafe became a frequent stop, not just for coffee, but for conversation. Sarah would sit by the window, watching the town go about its day, Residents greeted her warmly now, their smiles genuine, their gratitude heartfelt. It was a stark contrast to the wary glances and hushed whispers she had encountered when she first arrived. One morning, as she sipped her coffee, Ellen sat down across from her, a mischievous twinkle in her eye. "So," Ellen began, leaning forward, "what's next for the great Sarah Hudson?" Sarah laughed, shaking her head. "That's the question, isn't it? For the first time, I don't have an immediate answer." "Maybe that's a good thing," Ellen said. "You've been running full speed for so long. Maybe it's time to let life come to you for a change." Sarah nodded, Ellen's words resonating deeply. "I'm starting to see the appeal of that. For once, I'm not in a rush to move on." Ellen's grin widened. "Well, if you decide to stick around, I wouldn't complain. This town could use someone like you." Later that day, Sarah met Tom at the bridge for a routine inspection. Though the project was officially complete, she wanted to ensure everything was holding up well in the weeks since the reopening. As they walked along the structure, Tom pointed out minor adjustments the crew would need to make. But overall, the bridge remained solid. "I have to admit," Tom said as they reached the midpoint, "I'm going to miss working on this with you. It's been inspiring." Sarah smiled, touched by his words. "I'll miss it too. But I think we've left something pretty special behind." Tom nodded, gazing out at the river. "So, are you really thinking about staying in Bridgewater?" The question caught Sarah off guard, though it had been lingering in her mind since the ceremony. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "This place has surprised me in a lot of ways. I didn't expect to feel so connected to it." "Well," Tom said with a grin, "if you do stay, I think I speak for everyone when I say we'd be lucky to have you." As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found herself reflecting on her time in Bridgewater. What had started as a professional challenge had become something far more personal. The bridge wasn't just a project, it was a turning point, a chance to reconnect with herself and what truly mattered. That evening, Sarah joined Mark and Lily for dinner at their home. It was a modest but cozy space, filled with books, photographs, and the unmistakable warmth of a family that valued each other deeply. Lily, now a confident teenager, talked animatedly about a school project inspired by the bridge, her enthusiasm infectious. "You've been a big influence on her, you know," Mark said quietly as Lily stepped into the kitchen to grab dessert. Sarah glanced at him, surprised. "I have," Mark nodded, his expression earnest. "She's seen what it means to work hard for something you believe in, to face challenges and come out stronger. That's a lesson she'll carry with her." Sarah felt a lump in her throat, his words touching a part of her she hadn't realized needed to hear them. "That means a lot, Mark. Thank you." As they said their goodbyes later that night, Mark walked her to the door. The air was cool and crisp, the night sky clear and filled with stars. "You've done something incredible here," he said, his voice low. "And not just with the bridge. You've left your mark on this town." Sarah met his gaze, her voice soft. "This town has left its mark on me too." Mark smiled, his warmth reaching her in a way that made her feel steady and whole. "Wherever you go next, just know you'll always have a place here." As Sarah walked home under the starlit sky, she felt a quiet certainty settle over her. Whether she stayed in Bridgewater or moved on, the connection she had built here would remain a part of her. She had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for, a sense of belonging, a foundation she could carry with her into whatever came next. The auditorium buzzed with quiet anticipation as Sarah adjusted the microphone at the podium. She had been invited to speak at a regional conference on architecture and community development, her work on the Bridgewater project having garnered attention beyond the town's borders. Architects, engineers, and community leaders filled the seats, their curious eyes fixed on her. Sarah felt the familiar nerves bubble up, but she steadied herself with a deep breath. This wasn't about accolades or professional validation. It was about sharing the journey that had changed her life. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice steady but warm. "I'm here today to talk about a project that, on the surface, might seem like just another bridge. But to me and to the people of Bridgewater, it became something far greater." She paused, letting her words settle over the audience. "When I first arrived in Bridgewater, I saw the bridge as a technical challenge, a structure in need of repair and modernization. But as I spent time with the community, listening to their stories and understanding their connection to the bridge, I realized it wasn't just a structure, it was a symbol of resilience, history, and hope." Sarah clicked through the first slide of her presentation, displaying a photograph of the bridge before construction began. Its worn arches and moss-covered stones seemed almost fragile compared to the sleek, modern designs she had worked on in the past. The challenge wasn't just about reinforcing the bridge, it was about preserving what made it unique while ensuring it could serve the community for generations to come. And to do that, I had to step back and let the voices of the town guide the process. The next slide showed images of her team working alongside the people of Bridgewater, Mark pointing out historical details, Tom making adjustments to the design, and residents gathered at town hall meetings, their faces alight with passion and concern. Collaboration became the heart of this project, Sarah continued. It wasn't about imposing a solution, it was about co-creating one. That's where the true transformation happened, not just in the bridge, but in me. As she spoke, Sarah felt the weight of her journey unfold before her. She talked about the obstacles, the unexpected structural challenges, the tight budget, and the skepticism she faced from people like Richard Hale. But she also shared the breakthroughs, the moments of trust she earned, the relationships she built, and the profound sense of purpose that emerged. The final slide displayed the completed bridge, bathed in golden light during the reopening ceremony. The room fell silent as the audience took in its beauty, the way it stood strong and proud, a testament to everything the town had overcome. "This bridge taught me that architecture isn't just about materials or aesthetics," Sarah said, her voice softening. "It's about people. It's about creating spaces that honor their stories, their connections, and their dreams. And it's about understanding that sometimes the most meaningful work isn't about building something new, it's about preserving what already matters." The room erupted into applause as Sarah stepped back from the podium, a wave of relief and pride washing over her. She had come full circle, not just as an architect, but as a person who had learned to listen, to adapt, and to grow. After the talk, Sarah mingled with the audience, answering questions and listening to their own stories of community-driven projects. Many expressed admiration for her ability to balance innovation with preservation, and more than one person told her they felt inspired to take a similar approach in their own work. "Your story reminds me why I got into this field," one young architect said, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "It's easy to get caught up in the technical side of things, but this is what it's all about." Sarah smiled, her heart full. "It's easy to forget sometimes, but projects like this remind us that our work has the power to bring people together." As the event wound down, Sarah found herself reflecting on how far she had come since her first day in Bridgewater. She had arrived with a singular focus on rebuilding her career, but she had left with something far more valuable, a deeper understanding of herself and her work. Later that evening, as Sarah returned to her hotel room, she opened her laptop and began drafting an email to Mark. She hadn't yet decided where her next steps would take her, but she wanted him to know how much his support and friendship had meant. "Mark," she wrote, "you told me once that the best things are the ones we don't see coming. Bridgewater was one of those things for me. Thank you for helping me see that." As she hit send, Sarah felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The bridge she had built wasn't just a connection across a river, it was a connection to a new chapter of her life, one filled with purpose, resilience, and the courage to keep moving forward. The train pulled into the small Bridgewater station late in the afternoon, its rhythmic chugging slowing to a gentle halt. Sarah stepped onto the platform, a suitcase in one hand and her sketchbook tucked under her arm. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of leaves and wood smoke, wrapping her in a familiar warmth. It had been months since she had left Bridgewater for the conference and other professional engagements, but returning felt like slipping into a well-worn coat. Ellen was waiting at the station, her wide smile visible even from a distance. She waved enthusiastically and hurried over, pulling Sarah into a tight hug. "It's so good to see you," Ellen exclaimed. "How was the conference? Or should I say, how does it feel to be a local celebrity?" Sarah laughed, shaking her head. "It was a whirlwind, but I'm glad to be back. I miss this place." "Well, this place missed you," Ellen said, looping her arm through Sarah's. "Come on, Mark's waiting at the cafe. He hasn't stopped talking about your return." The mention of Mark sent a quiet warmth through Sarah. During her time away, their occasional phone calls had become an anchor, a reminder of the connection she had found in Bridgewater. When they arrived at the cafe, Mark was sitting at a corner table, a cup of coffee in front of him. He stood as they approached, his smile both steady and welcoming. "Welcome back," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that Sarah had come to cherish. "Thanks," Sarah replied, her own smile matching his. "It's good to be home." The word hung in the air between them. Home. For the first time, Sarah realized she truly meant it. Bridgewater had become more than just a stop on her journey. It was a place where she had found purpose, community, and a sense of belonging. Over coffee, the three of them caught up, sharing stories and updates. Ellen filled Sarah in on the latest town gossip, while Mark recounted Lily's recent achievements at school. As they talked, Sarah felt a sense of ease she hadn't known in years, the kind that came from being surrounded by people who cared. Later, Mark walked Sarah to the bridge, the two of them strolling in comfortable silence. The structure stood tall and proud, its arches reflecting the soft glow of the setting sun. It was a perfect symbol of everything the town had endured and achieved. "I hear people are calling it the Hudson Bridge now," Mark said, a teasing smile on his lips. Sarah laughed. "That wasn't my idea." "Maybe not," Mark said, "but it fits. You brought it back to life." They stopped at the midpoint, leaning on the railing as the river flowed steadily beneath them. The air was cool, but the moment was warm, filled with unspoken understanding. "Mark," Sarah began, her voice soft. "When I came here, I was looking for a way to rebuild my career. But what I found was so much more than that. This place, this bridge, it changed me." Mark looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "And you changed this place. You brought something here that we didn't even know we needed." They stood in silence for a while, the sounds of the river and the distant hum of the town filling the air. Sarah felt a quiet contentment settle over her, the kind that came from knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the bridge in hues of gold and amber, Sarah turned to Mark, a small smile playing on her lips. "I think I'm ready to stop running." Mark's smile widened, his voice steady and sure. "Good, because Bridgewater's a pretty good place to stand still." The two of them stood there as the last light of day faded, the bridge beneath them a testament to resilience, connection, and the power of starting anew. For Sarah, it wasn't just the end of a journey. It was the beginning of something extraordinary. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.